Good afternoon, everybody, or evening or morning, depending on where you're dialing in. Hello, Karen. Nice to see so many of you joining us. Really appreciate you making the time for this webinar today. We're just letting people in now, so we'll give it another minute or so as people are perhaps finishing up other meetings. Hi, Joe. I can see Joe on the call.
Hello. Hello.
Good to see you. We are quite a big-ish group today, so if you can mute yourselves for now, that'd be great. If not, Katie will hopefully find you and mute you. We would love to hear from you. It's just with a big group, sometimes it'd be a little bit off-putting when you hear lots of background noise. So we'll just do that. There will be opportunity for questions at the end, though, so don't worry. We'd love to hear your voices, and of course, always make use of the chat. It's always good to get a little bit of conversation going in the background, so please feel free to use the chat and the reaction buttons as well. Always good. It's always nice to get a few waves or thumbs up from people, or even a hand up if you want to speak. We like that. That's great. Interaction's all good. Just give it another few seconds and we'll get started. Nice to see a few people that we know. Oh, Lauren, it's chilly, is it? Hello from Edinburgh. Wow, that's a good spread. Edinburgh to Norwich to various other places. I'm in Hastings today. It's actually sunny. We're quite lucky because an hour ago I had a load of teachers obviously striking out literally outside my office window. Absolutely fair play to them, but I was thinking, oh, I really hope they move on by the time the webinar. But before it's time for the webinar, they've gone inside now. They're having a cup of tea inside, so it's all good. Yeah, it's very cold down here too. We're just waiting for Lee to join us. He's as always, you practice these things, you do rehearsals, you run through, but the demon technical hitch always gets you at the last minute. And as someone that used to be in a band many years ago, fell foul of that many times when you kind of get ready and then something would kind of just go wrong at the end and you have to play 3 songs rather than your 8 songs. So I'm very familiar with it. It was called the demon technical hitch. Happens to us all. It's part of life. We're all used to it. So
we've got someone dialing in from Michigan.
Oh,
Christina.
hi.
What time is it? What time is it there at the moment, Christina?
Oh, it's 8 a.m. so it's not too bad at all.
Okay, that's not terrible.
Nope.
Still enjoying your morning coffee at this point in time. That's good. That's got to be the furthest, I think, so far on the call. Anyone further than Michigan?
Okay, I'm conscious of time, so let's get started. So welcome everybody to this webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. We were kind of debating, because we're releasing the white paper today, which you'll all get a copy of, a benchmarking white paper. And we were like, should we run a webinar on this? And we put a poll out on LinkedIn and the resounding answer was, yes, please. So that's why we're here. So thank you for signing up. I'd also straight away like to give a shout out to Karen Notaro, who is on the call. And Karen was seconded to People Lab for 6 months and helped us put a lot of this stuff together. So big thank you to Karen. My name is Emma Bridger and I am founder of People Lab, and I'm joined today by my colleague Katie Austin, who's next to me there. She might not be on your screen, so it's someone else. Hopefully that's not confused you. Also joined by my new colleague Lee Smith. More about that in just a minute. I'm going to share some slides today. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly to give you plenty of time to ask questions. And as I said, you'll all get the white paper at the end of the webinar as well. So thank you for joining. I'm just going to get the slides up now. Like I said in the background, please feel free to use the chat and reactions, and Katie will interrupt me at any point if there's a kind of burning question coming through. She's quite happy to do that. So just a very quick intro to People Lab. I'm not going to kind of, bang on about us and what we're all about, but running the company now for 14 years. We're all about helping companies to improve engagement by focusing on the experience. So I've been working in the field of EX and engagement now for over 20 years. Have written a couple of books on the subject. I'll bring those up afterwards. I'm sure we can get a discount code if anyone's interested. So that's what we're all about. And the way we come at this is we know when you get it right with your people, great things happen. Everything else falls into place. So, you know, people are more innovative, they are more productive, they're less likely to leave, they're likely to say good things about the organization. So that's what we're all about. But I'd also like to take the opportunity to talk to you about a new venture which Lee and I have founded together called the EX Space. So Lee, I don't know if you managed to sort out the Demon technical hitch and you're able to share a little bit of background about the EX Space.
I don't know. Let's give it a go. Am I still sounding echoey or am I okay?
You're okay. You're good to go. Well done.
Oh, amazing. Fantastic. Okay. Yeah. So hi, everyone. I'm Lee Smith. I'm an internal communication professional, really, by I spent three decades working in that space for a host of global organizations like EY, HSBC, Coca-Cola, BT, Telefonica, and a whole load more. I was a co-founder of an agency in London called Gator, which is now part of Gallagher, for 13 years. And during that time was very much led most of our audit stroke research work. So benchmarking is a particular passion, but also our learning and development work. And as Emma said, we got in late last year and shared our views on the employee experience and employee engagement. And we both felt now was the right time to do something different in the space. Two concepts are become a little bit confused. There's huge passion and lots about employee experience, as there is still about employee engagement. But people are sometimes a little bit unclear on what to do and how to do it, and they're lacking from a kind of common toolkit. So we decided to launch a platform, the EX Space, which will launch later this spring. It's dedicated to learn for experience and employee engagement professionals. It's a membership-based community, and at the heart of it will be accredited learning, both from us, but also from world-renowned experts. We'll have a program of webinars. We'll have a practical toolkit. We'll have thought leadership. We'll have a vibrant community that offers peer-to-peer support, networking, conversation and discussion on aspects of employee engagement and employee experience. Do you want to move on to the next?
I'm just going to interrupt you there. I spoke too soon. It started off the sound, and as you continued, it's got more and more echoey. So I think if it's okay with you, if I take the next slide,
I'll shut up. Yeah,
no,
the joys
fine,
of industry.
Yeah, it's always the way, isn't it? Like I say, this is the first time it's ever happened on Zoom with Lee, but there you go. It's fine. You sound like you've got a bit of a stutter, Lee. So yeah, our mission is to enable the EX era, as we're calling it, and just wanted to flag that we're open for people to sign up to our mailing list right now, and there's going to be lots of kind of exclusive launch offers and updates, and it's really about gathering a community together to help shape the future of EX. So we're really excited about this and really where this takes us. And I'll just tell you a little bit more about a webinar we're running off the back of some really interesting research that we ran the second half of last year, but I'll come on to that later. So for now, let's talk benchmarking. Actually, no, before we talk benchmarking, Kate is going to run a quick poll, aren't you, Katie? So would you like to introduce the poll, Katie? Is that okay?
No problem at all. Yes. So I thought before we got started, just really interested to know what your experience is. So I've got a question here I'm about to launch. So the question is, hopefully you can all see that on your screens. Do you look at external data to benchmark your organization? Yes, always. Sometimes, maybe out of curiosity. No, we use something else, maybe internal measures, maybe something else. Or no, we don't even measure at the moment. So I'm watching the numbers tick up as you answer the poll, and in a moment I'll share the results. Okay, just a couple more people. Okay, very interesting. Okay, I'm going to share the answers here. So you'll see it's pretty mixed. It's pretty mixed. So 40% said yes, always. 24% said sometimes out of curiosity. no, we use something else, same 24%, and 12% saying no, we don't even measure at the moment. So whilst Emma continues with the slides, just really interested to sort of hear what is working for you. So why do you benchmark? Do you find it useful? So do take a moment, feel free to use the chat and just share what your experiences are. Do you benchmark? Why do you benchmark? And do you find it useful? I'll hand back to you, Emma.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so feel free to use the chat to kind of give a little bit of context around your answer there. We're really interested to see what sits beneath your answer. And you can feel free to use the chat to do that whilst I'm going through the slides. So back to the slides. So let's start at the beginning. What do we actually mean by benchmarking? Really simply, benchmarking is about, first of all, measuring and then comparing performance to best practice and industry leaders. That's the kind of the official definition of benchmarking. It is certainly something that in our world, particularly of employee engagement and becoming more so employee experience, I don't know about you, but the C-suite, in my experience, when I was in-house for 10 years, are pretty obsessed with it. How do we measure up? How do we compare? It's very natural to want to compare ourselves to others. There are, of course, different types of benchmarking. And just, I guess, to keep this simple, the two questions that I think, you need to ask yourselves, first of all, who are you comparing yourselves to, and who's useful for you to compare yourselves to? It might be you're comparing yourselves internally. For example, when we do surveys, we often look at different departments or teams. We use heat maps. We look at how different areas of the business are performing. But I think more commonly, when we talk about benchmarking in the world of engagement and experience, we're often thinking about that external benchmarking. And that might be what we call competitive benchmarking. So we want to know how we compare with our direct competitors. That's easier in some industries than others. You might be in an industry that hasn't really got any obvious direct competitors, which is probably good news for you. But in other industries, there's lots of competition to compare yourselves to. It might be more of a generic industry kind of benchmark. So not our direct competitors, but they work in the same industry as us. So what's the kind of, what are the kind of best practice benchmarks for people working in the automotive industry or the people industry or the retail industry? Let's just kind of get more of a kind of a flavor of how that industry performs, which I think is important because there's context in there. And there's also what we call generic benchmarks, which just kind of, we know what our employee engagement index is, and we want to just compare that around the world. We want to look at what other companies are doing. May not be related to us in any way. We don't mind. That's okay. That's called generic benchmarking. So the first question is, who are you comparing yourself to? And the second question, really important, is, well, what are you actually comparing? So again, three areas here. First of all, performance. That's, again, a classic kind of engagement index, if you like, is an example of a performance benchmark. So we have an engagement index, either a number or a percentage, and we want to compare that to other engagement indexes. That's a performance benchmark. But we might want to compare processes. So you might say, actually, we have a process, for example, performance management. How do we compare to other companies? What does best practice look like? What are companies that are cutting edge doing in this area? And we might want to compare strategic measures from a benchmark point of view. So that might be just more generic best practice or core competencies. And as I'm talking through those, you can see quite clearly that you may use either quantitative data, i.e. engagement index in numbers. We get a number at the end, spat out at the end, very little context, but we have a number to compare. So that's kind of often what our C-suite love. What's the best practice engagement index and how near or far are we from that? But it also might involve qualitative data. So for example, if you're looking at best practice or you're looking at performance management, you need to get into the qualitative data, the how, not just the what, but the how. How do people do this? How do they get to that end results? What's the journey they go on? What is it they're actually doing differently? And it's not the case that one is better than the other. They're both equally useful when you are thinking about benchmarking. And I think overall, my key messages here is the aim of benchmarking should always be to provide learning opportunities, rather than to get into that kind of comparison place where you're just sort of saying, well, if that competitor of ours scores an 81% index, we need to have that as well. It should always be, well, what are we learning from this? How is it helping us to improve the experience and engagement of our people? Hope that all makes sense. And Lee, I don't know if you're still echoing or not, but I know you did a lot of benchmarking back in your Gatehouse days, didn't you, using more of a qualitative approach to benchmarking. Let's see if you're echoing or not.
Let's give it a try. How does that sound, Emma? Any better? Still,
it's still quite echoey, Lee. It's still quite echoey.
I'll answer on the. How's that?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that. Okay, and for me, I come back to this: context is king. I mean, I'm hoping this will translate actually. So this is a classic kind of is it a meme? I don't know. Before memes were around, it was a classic kind of image that we share in the world of education, actually. So the world of education, this idea of let's make a fair selection, everyone has to take the same exam, please climb that tree. And clearly it's a very, very flawed approach to making a fair selection, clearly because of the context in terms of the strengths of those different animals that you see there. So some of them would be really great at climbing a tree, some wouldn't, but actually others would be really good at swimming, for example, or walking on ice. I think this translates really well to the world of benchmarking, because I think we get really hung up on that number, that one number comparison. And we forget about the context, you know, of our organization, the strengths of our organization. Just to give you a few examples, you know, you might have, you know, a senior director or chief executive desperate to benchmark and desperate to kind of come up with a number, like get me to that number. And it's really important to take a step back and think about the context in which your organization operates in. So, for example, you know, we've just been through a number of tumultuous years around the world, and we've probably got a few more to go. That's going to have an impact on kind of, you know, performance scores that you get from your employee engagement index, if you like. And also your employee experience scores. Now, there are some industries that maybe thrived, you know, over the last few years. People actually kind of got some really interesting work to get their teeth stuck into. You know, times might have been quite good. And on the flip side, there have been some other industries where it's been really, really tough. So actually, our comparison's really fair? Probably not. And we work with, we've had this a few times actually, clients where they use the employee net promoter score as one of their kind of key benchmarks. Employee net promoter score, it's detailed in the report in terms of what it is and how you get to it and the question you use. But essentially, it's a scale of 1 to 10. And the question is, you know, to what extent would you recommend this as a great place to work to other people, friends and family? And 10 is absolutely without doubt, and 0 is no chance. And we've had the experience where we've worked with clients where in their, you know, in their overall engagement survey, they've had some really, really good scores. The scores are telling a very clear story that people are happy to work there. They're enjoying the work they do. You know, things are really good. And the qualitative data backs that up. And yet we found that that score sometimes doesn't really match what you'd expect to see. But people are saying, no, but I wouldn't recommend it. Well, so why is that? So I mean, when we dig into that, there's a whole host of reasons to why we found that to be the case. So for example, with one client, you know, people sort of saying it's a brilliant place to work, but at the moment that these people are thinking externally, the future's so uncertain, we don't really know what the next few years are going to bring. So although it's great today, I probably wouldn't recommend it because we know things are going to be quite tough. So yeah, I'm here and I'd stay here, but I'd just be a bit nervous about recommending it. So just one example of how that one score can kind of maybe not tell you the whole story, the whole picture. So just that illustrates hopefully why just relying on a single score is a little bit dangerous. So challenges with benchmarking, I've put comparing apples and pears there. So it's a bit of an anecdote. I don't know if it's a UK thing, it might be a global thing. But in the UK, often we say it's like comparing apples and pears. And the point is, you can't, because they're different fruits. You can't compare apples and pears. They're very different fruits. They taste very differently. So let's not try. So part of the problem with benchmarking is that right up front, we do not have a single universal definition of either engagement or employee experience. Despite trying for many years, it's just not there. So you're always going to be comparing slightly different things. So depending on, for example, the survey provider that you use, they will have a different model of engagement they use. They will have different ways of measuring engagement. So you're always going to be comparing different things. And even if you say, well, yeah, but we get our benchmark from our survey supplier and they have, you know, one way of benchmarking, well, that might be the case, but sometimes other things creep in as well. Sometimes, you know, people sort of say, actually, we want to tweak the way we measure engagement in our organization. And most survey suppliers will say, okay, we can use a slightly different way of doing that. So that's the first problem with benchmarking, which leads on to the second point, which is the different models and approaches. So no universal definition and a whole range of different models and approaches. They're all kind of vaguely similar. But if we're being really scientific about this, and I kind of put my psychologist hat on here, you know, when psychologists develop ways to benchmark intelligence, for example, we have IQ, and even that has lots of criticisms of it. You know, they do a lot of work into ensuring that, you know, we use the same way of measuring every single time. So clearly the fact we've got different ways, models and approaches, different ways of measuring, third point, means that, you know, it makes comparisons really tricky. And that final point, that lack of context, means that even if we were to use exactly the same definition, exactly the same model, exactly the same ways of measuring, what that number doesn't give you is the context of your organization and what's happening for you. And I've given you a few examples before to illustrate that. So it's challenges with benchmarking. But I'd also say that it can be really useful. I think benchmarking is a really good learning opportunity. Just getting curious about how the industry is performing, how other markets are performing, what's happening outside of your organization is always going to be, you know, a really useful activity to undertake. And I also think benchmark, I've got a piece of jigsaw there, it can be a useful piece of the overall jigsaw puzzle. So think about the whole picture. So when you're looking at how you compare, you know, think about what's going on with your organization, what's going on with your industry, what's happening, you know, more globally. Think about the whole picture and take the benchmark, but, you know, understand what it means in context of the whole. And also your organizational context in there as well is also vital. I think it's really helpful to use a range of data points and insights. And I'll come back onto this in a minute, just to illustrate some of the problems with using one measure. You might say, okay, Net Promoter Score is a problem with just that one measure because you're not, you know, looking at the whole picture there. And as I say, my key takeaway here is it's one piece of the jigsaw. So I think as long as we are aware of the challenges of benchmarking, it can still be really, really useful to look at the whole and get curious about what's happening. Benchmarking employee engagement, and there's in the report there's a lot more data, insights, a lot more info on this. I'm just going to kind of skim over this now. The first thing to say is there are a lot of different models and approaches to measure engagement. For example, we've got the Gallup Q12. Most of you might have heard of that. That's one example. Aon Hewitt used their Say, Stay, Strive model. Some people just use the Net Promoter Score. The only kind of accepted, valid and reliable way of measuring engagement around the world is what's called the Scheffeli and Baker's work engagement scale. And as the title says, it measures the work, engagement with the work that we do rather than engagement as a whole. But it is one model you can use, and we've included the questions in the pack for you. Excuse me. And that measures, see if I can remember, vigor, energy, and absorption with the work that you do. So a different way of measuring engagement. So lots of different models and lots of different ways of measuring engagement. And in the report, we include some of the most commonly used in there. There are lots more. You might use a different way, but just to illustrate straight away, find the one that you think is going to work best for your organization, because they are all sort of, quite a few differences. So some of them feel quite similar, but when you get to the nitty-gritty, there are quite big differences between them. The common measure, though, is to come up with a number, an employee engagement index number. And that might be a percentage, it might be a number between 1 and 10, it might even be a number between 0 and 1, but it'll come up with a number for you. And there are many different ways that these companies, providers, will calculate this as well. Some of them just might be a straightforward kind of aggregated sort of percentage of a few items, questions on the survey that they use. Other suppliers will use a much more complicated way of coming up with that number. Some questions will be weighted more heavily. Some will look at the drivers of engagement. So there are lots of different ways to calculate this, and we go into that in more depth in the report. Benchmarking EX, well, we don't have an EX index yet, which I think is a good thing. I think it's a really good thing because employee experience is so broad and so holistic. How on earth can we really distill it down into a single number? I think that'd be quite dangerous. What I would say is that Glassdoor is a really good place to start. It's got some great kind of high level sort of measures and metrics on Glassdoor, like the percentage that rate the CEO, for example, some really good measures and metrics, and it's all in the public domain. So you can have a nose around your competitors, see what they're up to. You can look at different industries, you can look at different territories. So Glassdoor is a really good place to start if you want to benchmark your employee experience. So have a look what's on there and pull out the data that you think is useful for you and see how you compare on there. CIPD have what's called their Good Work Index. Now, this kind of looks at more of the quality of work that people do, how much they rate the work they do as being quality. So it's really about the work that people do. I think two of the kind of early movers in terms of trying to come up with a framework for measuring EX are the Towers Willis Watson. Again, it's all in the report. They talk about HPX, and I've got it written in front of me down here because I knew I wouldn't remember all this. They have 12 components. It's quite a complicated model actually, but 12 components that they say measures the overall holistic people experience. And they talk about purpose, the work, the reward, and the people. And McKinsey talk about the social, work, and organizational EX. So again, we've included these models in the pack so you can have a look at them. And some might really resonate with you. You might think, actually, yeah, I think that would be a really good fit for us. So let's think about how we could take some of the way that they measure EX in these models and start to measure it ourselves internally, and then see if we can do some benchmarking around that. The model that I'm going to recommend, though, of course, I'm going to share a model of ours, which is called the Magica model of experience. And there's a really big difference with our model and everyone else's model in that we're not as prescriptive. So absolutely, we have kind of the as in the Willis Towers Watson, they have their 12 components. We have our universal themes, and those are the things around the outside. And in the pack, we explain this in more detail, and we can share with you the questions you might use to measure those universal themes. But we also recognize there will always be individual differences. And that is that context, not just to you as an organization, but to your individuals as well. And say, actually, experience is incredibly subjective. It is not up to us to assume that we know what a good experience looks like for our people. We have to get curious and go out and find out what makes a great experience for them. So the other equally important side of the coin of this model is to say, yep, universal themes are great. They'll get you halfway there. But you've got to take time to find out what good looks like for your people. And once you do that, and we use a tool called the Best Experience tool, which is a really simple conversation, which enables people to share stories about times when they were at their best at work. And we take the outputs from those stories, qualitative data, and we distill that into kind of very specific measures for that organization. So they'll always be very unique to each organization. And just to bring this to life for you, for example, when we ran Best Experience conversations with the British Council, one of the kind of key areas that came out was, the social side of it, work hard, play hard, and the kind of adventurousness of working at the British Council. Like, I never knew where I was going to end up. It was really exciting. You'd be posted in different countries, working on different projects. It was really exciting. Every week was different. That's kind of really showed up for them. But when we did this for Rolls-Royce, they talked about, having a really, really clear brief. It was black and white. I knew what was expected of me. I knew what I had to get to. The social side, the adventurous side didn't feature at all. So by taking time to get curious about what a great experience and therefore engagement looks like for your people, you can then come up with your own measures as well. So that's why we recommend this model. How am I doing for time? All right, I think. I want to get on to questions. Just to bring this to life in the report, we've taken some of the public domain benchmarks that are out there, and there's many more in the report, but just to bring it to life, just to illustrate what I'm talking about here. If you were to use the Gallup Q12 measures, then you would have a benchmark, well, not a benchmark, but they say around 21% of people are engaged at work. Okay, great. If you use Qualtrics, which is another great provider, they talk about 6-7% being engaged. So straight away, just by using those different survey providers, you're going to get a very different benchmark results. Okay, so that's just, I guess, just to come back to what I said at the beginning around what is it you're actually comparing. And in our People Lab benchmarks, our EEI is 75%. So we obviously get to work with people who are, you know, really, well, it makes sense. The people we work with are people that are really focused on experience and engagements. They're probably going to have a higher percentage index on that as well. So just to illustrate that point, really. So in summary, I think just to kind of round it up and open the floor to questions, there's no universally agreed definition, so this makes comparisons really tricky, but I still think it's really useful to benchmark as long as you are cognizant of the you know, some of the issues with it, and you don't get too hung up on that one number. It is still useful. Your context is absolutely king, so remember the context of your organization. Use a range of different data points. Don't just rely on one data point. Yeah, use Net Promoter Score, but what else can you look at? What other measures can you look at? Explore the different approaches available. So choose the right one for you. Obviously, we recommend using the Magica model because that's always going to be right for you because it's based on data from your own people, but there might be others out there that work for you as well. And just remember, this is one piece of the jigsaw. And for me, the takeaway is that really think about how you can identify the red flags long before they show up in your survey. And the numbers change all the time. So we're going to be updating this report probably twice a year. If they haven't changed much in 6 months, we'll just do it yearly. So we'll be in touch and share the next report with you in due course. So I just want to open it up to questions before I just share my last slide or two. So are any questions coming through, Katie, on the chat? Anyone want to unmute and ask me a question?
We do have a question in the chat. We have
Brilliant.
one from Sally, who says, do you recommend this model, talking about Magica, for any size organisation?
Yeah, simple answer, yeah. We've used it with organisations as small as sort of like 20 people, all the way through up to like, over 100,000 people. It works really, really well. So yeah, any size. The point is, you're not making assumptions about what questions to ask. The problem with the sort of the survey model at the moment is that some very clever person somewhere has decided that they know what questions to ask, which is fine. But I've seen this so many times where, you know, you look at your results, you say, right, we want to improve our performance on that question, and you put a lot of time and effort and energy into improving something which actually doesn't really matter that much to people just because it was low scoring. So by doing it this way, by starting off by saying, you tell us what good looks like for you, then you can look at your survey, and we've done this with quite a few clients. You look at the survey and say, actually, a load of the questions in the survey, great, because they really align to what we hear from the best experience conversations, but there's just a few more we want to add in that survey didn't have in there at all. You know, it might be around belonging, for example, who knows? I'm trying to think of some examples here on my feed, Kate. You might have some good examples, but you know, the British Council example, that need for adventurousness, the need for kind of feeling like, you know, who knows what's going to happen next week. That was really key for them having a great experience at work. So yeah, it works for any size organisation.
I'll just add to that as well, that you don't even need to look organisation wide. So you might be in an organisation where you haven't got that top level buy-in, and you just want to get a feel for maybe your area that you're responsible for. And you can ask that question in your teams. You can ask it in small teams and still get a real feel of what's important to the people that you're working with or have within your team. So just a comment in response to that from Karen, saying that her organisation is 92,000 and Magica still fits really, really well. So I think
thanks, Karen.
Brings it to life. Brilliant. Another question in the chat from Simra. How are qualitative answers stories measured on a data scale, if there even are?
Yeah, so you wouldn't measure. So qualitative is not about measuring, it's about the quality of the data, right? It's about the insights you're getting from that. So you wouldn't use qualitative. When we say benchmarking, it's more the comparison. You'd use qualitative to make comparisons, not to measure. So, you know, if two people are running a race, one of them might win, but the other one might have a really, really good technique that, you know, in the future is going to enable them to kind of like really improve their performance. So it's more about the how than the what, if that makes sense. I think both are important, and I know Leah backed me up on that. So I think it's really good to look at both. Where you can translate though is, the best experience conversation, having those conversations and gathering that qualitative data. You can then turn qualitative data into quantitative data and then measure it. So you can say, actually, some of the key themes that are coming out of my best experience conversations are that our people, want to be adventurous at work, or they want a really clear brief. So we can turn that then into a question on our survey, and then we can measure it. So that's how you do that.
Brilliant. Thanks. Okay, from Sarah Parker. First of all, great presentation, Emma. And would you recommend scaling the Magica model using defined employee personas? I'm happy to pick that one up if you like.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Brilliant. In short, yes, it works really, really well. So you can have your Magica model to get a feeling of what thing might be more important for one group of people in your organization to others. So you would expect some of those universal themes to show up across the board, but it might be that one persona group, it's much more important to have, I don't know, let's say autonomy than another group. So I think that's a really good way to kind of look and test your personas and get a bit more insight about the different people that make up your organization. And I think the other thing to consider there is those individual differences. I think that's probably really key when you're looking at your personas and developing your personas. What are those individual differences that sets those people apart? And we have actually used the Magica model when developing personas with clients before, sort of looking at this particular persona group. These are the most important things from that Magica model. And for this persona group, it's these things. So I hope that helps answer that question. Anything you want to add to that, Em?
No, that's great. Thanks, Katie. Thanks for jumping in there.
Okay, another question here from Scott. Qualtrics has the XM25 where they're saying they're measuring EX. Curious why you've made the comment that not having an EX index is a good thing. Isn't it possible to come up with elements of experience that can be measured?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So I apologize if I didn't make myself clear. Yes, of course, you want to measure elements of EX, 100%. And I think the Qualtrics model is great. When I say an EX index, what I mean is distilling it down to one number. Like our EX index is 92% or 58%. I think that's dangerous. So yes, having different elements of the EX we can measure, brilliant, because it's so multifaceted, right? We might have a great experience, for example, with our colleagues and feel really connected, but the work we do is not a great experience. It's really difficult for us to get the job done, which is why I think it's really great we haven't gone. So employee engagement is the same, but unfortunately, people grabbed hold of that and kind of distilled it down to one number. So that EX index of like 38%, and that's the way the industry went. It's just not really helpful because there's so much behind that one number. So what I'm saying is I'm really glad that we haven't yet gone the same way with employee experience, because I think it's so nuanced. We absolutely need, as Qualtrics have, a range of different ways of measuring experience. So hopefully that makes sense.
Thanks, Em. Okay, I think that's it for questions in the chat for the time being. Any other questions, do feel free to pop them in, and if we've got time, we'll try and answer them before we close the session. And if we don't get around to answering them, we can always pick it up in some follow-up communications as well. I'll hand back.
Yeah, so if there are any more questions, feel free to pop them in the chat and we can pick them up. But whilst you're thinking about that, I wanted just to plug our next webinar on the 22nd of Feb. So as I kind of teased at the beginning, we have been doing some research. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. So I'm really, really chuffed that we're at this point now around what makes a brilliant EX actually an engagement practitioner. So it is EX particularly is an emerging discipline, and employee engagement, has been a discipline where people have kind of landed there from so many different places. So we went out and we spoke to around 30 practitioners in both engagement and experience who are doing great things to really find out the answers to this question. The idea was to really develop a kind of, originally we called it a competency framework, but we quickly realized that didn't feel right. So what we've come up with is something called the strengths role map. So if you're working in this field of EX and engagement, the question often is, how do we get good at this? What does development look like? And it's something, I've been training people in this area for years, but finally have some really good data in terms of what good looks like. And this EX and engagement strengths role map is going to be launched on the 22nd of Feb to help you understand, you know, the sort of role you're doing, where does that fit, and what you might need to focus on to kind of really, you know, progress your career and your development in this area. So we're super excited about this. So that's happening on 22nd of Feb. So Kate, you remind me where people can sign up for that. Is it in the chat? You're going to put it in the chat?
Yes, I'm multitasking, trying to get myself off mute, but also getting the link into the chat for you. I'll pop it in the chat. Don't worry if you don't have a chance to kind of click on it now. We'll also send it with all the follow-up comms as well, so you can sign up separately, but I will pop it in the chat in just a second. Yeah,
so that's pretty much it, unless there are any more questions. Obviously, talked about People Lab. We're here to help you on the consultancy side, and the EX space is launching in spring, and it's going to be, we're very excited about this, giving you the knowledge, the tools, the training, everything you need to really kind of design and unlock brilliant experiences that result in engagement for your people. So there'll be diagnostics on there, there'll be health checks, there'll be toolkits, there'll be an accredited course, so you'll be able to get a badge saying you've done the course, and that is absolutely for engagement and EX practitioners. So bringing those two worlds back together again as they should be. So I'm really super excited about that. So if you want to know more, feel free to sign up. Just go to the ex.space, you can sign up. Any other questions just before we finish, Katie? You've got like 3 minutes left.
Sorry, trying to unmute. No.
Okay.
No, that's it.
Thank you everybody for joining us. Really appreciate it. And enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, whatever that looks like. And yeah, hopefully see you at the next webinar. So take care and hopefully see you soon.